All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to Science Sundays. I'm John Beacom from Physics, Astronomy, and the Center for Cosmology and Astroparticle Physics. I'm the chair of the Science Sundays Committee. So the universe is a complicated place, and that's the part that I work on, is the universe itself. But what's in the universe is even more complicated, and that's all the stuff and all the processes and everything we see. And figuring all of that out is the business of science, and figuring out what it all means is the business of, humanity. And in the College of Arts and Sciences, we're doing all of those things. We're researching the facts about the universe and everything in it, and we're trying to make sense of it all. And more importantly, we're sharing the insights that we learned from research with our students through classes and research experiences, and also through the public through events like this, with the premier outreach event of the College of Arts and Sciences. So this is Science Sundays. I'd like to introduce Professor Ruchika Prakash. She's an Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor of Psychology, and she's also the director of the Center for Cognitive and Behavioral Brain Imaging. Now, you're wondering, that doesn't sound like the speaker you came to see. That's because this is the person who's going to, I'm the person who's going to introduce the person who's going to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, John, and thank you for all of you for being here. The Center for Cognitive and Behavioral Brain Imaging is really pleased to introduce our speaker for today, who's Dr. Ozioma Okonkwo, as the speaker for today's Science Sundays. Now, Dr. Okonkwo received his PhD from the University of Alabama at Birmingham and postdoctoral training at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He's currently a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Medicine. Research in his lab is focused on understanding the biological basis of Alzheimer's disease and how genetics and lifestyle influence an individual's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. Now, Dr. Okonkwo, who's a very good friend of mine, is an internationally recognized leader in Alzheimer's disease research. He leads the engagement core of the Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging initiative study, a consortium of over 60 clinical sites in the US and Canada that supports the investigation and development of treatments that slow or stop the progression of Alzheimer's disease, advocating for the recruitment and inclusion of underrepresented populations in research studies. Dr. Okonkwo is a tremendous mentor. He has recently been invited to be a mentor and instructor for a recently established neuroscience training program in Rwanda. He travels the world speaking about Alzheimer's disease, aging, and neurodegeneration. We really are so fortunate to have him here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Okonkwo.
Use the lapel mic.
Okay. Let me try and get my mic on. Does that work? All right. All right, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here this Sunday afternoon. Thank you all for a very warm invitation. And I hope that we're going to have a wonderful time exploring resilience to Alzheimer's, looking at it through the lens of exercise. All right, so if you are like me, for as long as I have had a physical activity and routine, when my alarm goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning, I get into one of these freak out modes. Okay? Do we have to park so far away? Somebody please call my mom. I see a bright light, right? Therefore, as long as I have engaged in a routine of regular physical activity, it is still not something like my alarm goes off and I'm like, yeah, let's go do this. I'm like, okay, it's Thursday at 4 o'clock, let's go, yeah. But my hope is that by the end of this talk, that I'm going to get you all to begin to be more jazzed about the concept of physical activity and regular exercise as a pathway to preventing Alzheimer's disease. And some of this might be ancient history for some of us here, but for the interest of everyone, the story of Alzheimer's as a brain disease began with this man and this woman that you see on the screen. So the man there is Dr. Alois Alzheimer's, whom at the point this photo was taken, actually at the point this whole story began, was a junior and professor in Germany. And he had just begun his appointment when this woman's family, who for the longest time was simply known as August D., her family brought her in to see Dr. Alzheimer's with concerns that she was beginning to have not actually memory issues, as you might have expected, but more like behavioral issues. That she was imagining things were happening in the home that were not happening. She was seeing things that clearly were not visible to anybody else. And then she has some language issues. The memory concerns were actually the least of the family's worries. And as a kind of, a segue from the talk content, for those who have ever cared for anyone with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, you know very well that the reason why the patient ends up being placed in a nursing home or other facilities by their family is not necessarily the cognitive issues, it's the behavioral issues. So when grandma or grandpa or mom or dad would no longer let you, bathe them or bathe themselves, and they fight you over everything, at some point, the family is like, okay, somebody else has to take this over now, right? So it was the behavioral issues that actually led them to bring August D to see Dr. Alzheimer's for the first time. But anyway, at this point, she was only about 51 years old. That's how old she was only. And I can see just, how sickly she looks. But so Dr. Alzheimer's, who was then a neuropsychiatrist and also a neuropathologist, admitted her into what was then called the asylum. That's the terms used then. And what was meant to be a very brief stay ended up being a 5-year-long stay. In fact, she did not leave the asylum alive. She died at the end of five years. And because Dr. Alzheimer was also a neuropathologist, he got her brain samples and examined them under a microscope. And he found some telltale lesions in her brain. And one of them is the lesion on your left there, my right, your left, which has since come to be identified as amyloid plaques, which is, you can tell that by the dense core of amyloid sheets in the plaque. And then on the right side here, neurofibrillary tangles. And tangles are made up of tau proteins. So based on this initial discovery, the field has then come to understand and accept that the presence of amyloid plaques and tau tangles came to identify what is called Alzheimer's as a disease. Now, an anecdote, which is actually real, is that, again, this woman was only 56 years old when she died. So when Dr. Alzheimer's made this discovery, he really didn't know what to call this disease because it was not like anything that was known at the time. So he called it pre-senile dementia. Now, as luck or fortune or whatever you call it might have it, Dr. Alzheimer's was then in the lab of somebody called Emil Kraepelin, who was the foremost psychiatrist in Europe at the time. And 4 years later, in 1910, when Dr. Kraepelin was writing a revision to what was then called the Handbook of Psychiatry, he decided that the discovery by his students or his faculty, junior faculty was of such import that he was going to put this in his handbook and also name it after him. And that is how it now came to be called Alzheimer's disease. Now, when I give this lecture or something like this to students, I tell them that the moral of this story is, be careful how you choose your mentors. They might make you famous. All right, so again, the narrative then became that to have amyloid plaques and tau tangles was to have dementia of the Alzheimer's type. And to be cognitively intact is to not have these lesions. So the presence of lesions is also the presence of symptoms. And that was what the field thought for a long time. However, as time went on, we began to also make some interesting discoveries from different clinics and centers around the world, that there are actually a subset of older adults whom, when they come to autopsy, that just looking at their brains alone and the amount of lesions and injury and insults in the brain, you would say that for sure this person had dementia. However, when they go back and look at their clinical profile, even up until the time of death, these individuals, shockingly, were cognitively normal. So that began to drive a wedge in this narrative that to have amyloid plaques and tau tangles and other types of lesions was tantamount to having dementia. And so the concept of resilience was then proposed to explain this observation that there is a mismatch in some individuals between what you see in the brain and what you observe clinically. And that there is, again, this a substantial subset of individuals for whom they have the pathology of the disease, but they do not have the symptoms thereof. And the concept of resilience, or you might also hear reserve, was put forth as a way to explain this mismatch between what is going on in the biology of the individual and what is happening clinically to them. There are different ways that this notion of resilience can be understood, but when it's boiled down, the fundamental basis here is that for each of us, our brains are able to withstand a certain amount of pathology. And it is only when the insults exceed that threshold that is when the symptoms begin to emerge. And research has shown that this resilience is undergirded by an interplay of genetic and lifestyle environmental factors. This cartoon here kind of tries to depict what that might look like. So if you imagine two individuals, the person in the blue line is the person with high resilience, and the person on the red line is the person with low resilience. Imagine on the x-axis there is time or age or any of the risk factors for dementia. Imagine on the y-axis is cognition. Then also imagine that for everyone that there is this hypothetical threshold below which if your cognition dips, then you have cognitive impairment. The notion of resilience does not say that the person who is high in resilience is never going to hit that threshold if they are on the path to Alzheimer's. That is not what the notion of resilience says. It simply says that that individual is going to hit that threshold at a more distal point in time compared to the individual who is slow on resilience. So think of that gap there between the red and blue lines as they cross that threshold as a span of about, say, 5 or 10 or so years, where the person who is high in resilience is still able to enjoy life and time with family, friends, and loved ones. That is what the notion of resilience means. Now, in my lab, we studied the notion of resilience primarily through looking at the lens of two of the key risk factors for Alzheimer's, and that is age and carrying one or more copies of the ApoE4 allele. Now, age as a major risk factor for Alzheimer's has been very well established. And some of the strongest evidence for this comes from autopsy studies. There is this power couple, Brack and Brack from Germany, who have done some of the most exquisite histological studies of Alzheimer's. So here, they had a very large case series of autopsy brains that they examined. On the right, they stained those brains for amyloid plaques, and on the left, they stained those brains for tangles. What you can observe, and then from top to bottom, is it goes from mild to more severe levels of plaques or tangles. What you can easily observe is that the more severe stages of either amyloid plaques or tau and tangles are only found in the oldest old. So age is a very strong canonical risk factor for Alzheimer's disease as a dementia, and also as a brain disease too. And then I mentioned that the next other key risk factor for Alzheimer's is ApoE4 allele. And the study that kind of brought this to light was from a group of scientists at Duke. They, and this was from, again, about 30 or so years now. They did a large case series published in Science, where they showed that depending on whether you carry 0, 1, or 2 copies of the ApoE4 allele, your lifetime risk for being diagnosed with Alzheimer's as a dementia went from about 24% for those who do not carry any copy of the ApoE4 allele in this series. It jumps to about 61% for those who carry only 1 copy of the ApoE4 allele, and then to a whopping 86 for those who carry 2 copies of this ApoE4 allele. So there definitely is a dose dependence for risk for Alzheimer's based on whether you carry 0, 1, or 2 copies of the ApoE4 allele. And so when my lab studies and resilience to Alzheimer's, the fundamental questions then that we try to ask is, are there other genetic or lifestyle factors that are known to modify the very well-established risk conferred by either age and or the ApoE4 allele? Now, backing up a little bit though, you might be asking, what are some of the factors that have been shown to confer resilience to Alzheimer's? And I have some of them here listed. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the factors that my lab has studied and found evidence for that there is some protection conferred by a number of these risk and factors. And if you've been following the literature in this area, you recognize that a lot of these concepts here are also found in the Lancet Commission that was, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Does this advance the slide too? No, I don't think so. Does this laser? Thank you. All right. All right. So again, like a bunch of these factors here can also be found in this very, very large white paper that was published by the Lancet Commission a few years back. But for the purposes of today's talk, we're going to be focusing on just the very last one, their physical activity. And you might be asking why? What's the big deal, right, as compared to any of the other ones? Now, several years back, some colleagues from UCSF published a very big epidemiological study where they looked at some of the canonical lifestyle factors that might have an impact on not just Alzheimer's but other forms of dementia. And they identified these factors there on the screen, these 7 factors. And the question they asked is that how much of a reduction in the incidence, that's new cases for Alzheimer's, can we reduce if we engage in either a 10% or a 25% reduction in any of these 7 risk factors? What is immediately observable there is that the reduction of number of new AD cases that can be prevented due to physical inactivity is much higher than any of the other 6 factors. Correct? Like that much is plain to see. But buried underneath this is also a different, an even bigger story, that physical activity also affects a number of those other risk factors too. And so the benefit of physical activity is not just those that can be attributed to it by itself, but also as a result of the impact it has on depression, high blood pressure, and so forth. So physical activity, at least in this one large study, has the potential to lead to a drastic reduction in new cases, new onset of Alzheimer's, if individuals are able to engage and sustain it going forward. Now, when people hear physical activity, there are a number of terms and concepts that they often use, which are related, but they are also distinct. The first one is physical activity itself. really any bodily movement of any sort that results in energy expenditure is physical activity. So when the Buckeyes are playing the Badgers, and it's halftime, and you run to your fridge for that cold glass of beer, yes, physical activity. Yes, it is. Yes. So again, it's any bodily movement that results in energy expenditure. Now, exercise itself is a subset of physical activity. And it is any physical activity that is planned. So it's 4 a.m. every day. Structured, repetitive, and intentional. Like, I am going to engage in this activity with the intention of burning some calories. It's intentional. Now, a concept that is not as widely known is this concept of aerobic fitness. And what that refers to is the ability of your body, your lungs, your heart, your muscles, your bones to support you in doing sustained work. That is what aerobic fitness is. And the canonical way that it is measured is through something called VO2 peak, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Now, whether it is physical activity or exercise, the evidence is very clear that for any of those to have a positive, favorable impact on your brain, it has to lead to an increase in your aerobic fitness. So whatever activity you are doing, if it does not help you adapt to an increase in aerobic and fitness, it might do other types of good for you, but definitely it will not have a durable impact on your brain health or cognition. All right. So for the studies I'm going to be showing you from my lab, it is based off of a cohort called the Wisconsin Registry for Alzheimer's Prevention, RAP. This study was started in 2001 as a study of persons who have one or both parents diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So these were individuals who were, about the age of 40 to 65 at baseline, but they have either one or both parents who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But the individuals who were enrolled in the studies themselves were all cognitively unimpaired. And currently, the baseline details is that about 72% of them have a family history of Alzheimer's, and the other 28% don't. Because, of course, to fully understand the impact of the risk of having a family history of Alzheimer's, to understand that, you have to compare that against somebody who doesn't have similar risks, right? So we had to expand the cohort at some point to include those who do not have a family history of Alzheimer's. And then, 39% of them carry at least one copy of the ApoE4 allele. And the majority of them are women, and currently the average age at baseline is about 66 years old. So with that backdrop, then let's look at some data. I'm going to walk you through data on those three concepts of physical activity, exercise, and aerobic fitness. The first one is physical activity. I'll begin by showing you this study that kind of was one of the, I don't want to say the first big study in this area, but it was one that demonstrated in a very clear way that there is a link between being physically active and a prospective risk for Alzheimer's. It's from this Rush study on aging. And so they followed these individuals who were enrolled in their study from when they were cognitively normal up until when some of them then developed AD. And they performed what is called a Cox proportional hazard model. And what they found that the guys in red are those who were physically active, and the black line is those who were physically inactive. And what you can appreciate is that the y-axis is the hazard, so the risk of developing Alzheimer's. And you can see that even though they begin with about the same amount of risk for Alzheimer's, as time went on, those who are physically inactive, their risk for Alzheimer's shot up. Whereas those who were physically active, the risk stayed below threshold. So this was one of the first studies that kind of showed this in a very compelling way. Now, as mentioned, the folks we study in the RAP and cohort are all cognitively unimpaired, so they do not have any kind of Alzheimer's or even mild cognitive impairments. So we had to ask a different question, but also a very important one, because up until now, most studies are looking at the risk of the clinical signs of the disease, right? But we wanted to understand what are the risks for adverse changes in the biology of the disease. So we asked, does engagement in physical activity attenuate the very well-established influence or effect of age on these 4 key biomarkers for Alzheimer's? Spoiler alert, it was a yes, 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 and yes again. But here's what the data show. So beginning with looking at amyloid plaques. So this is an amyloid PET scan. In a PET scan, red color means that a lot of the things that you are tagging for are present. So if what you are tagging for in the imaging is amyloid, red means that a lot of amyloid are there, right? So if you look at this, then the folks in red here are those who are physically inactive, and the folks in black are those who are physically active. When you look at them when they were about the age of 45, for reasons that we still do not understand, it looks as if that the folks who are physically active, it looks like they have more amyloid in the brain than those who are physically active. But where the action happens then is when you look at them over time. You see that those who are physically inactive, so the guys here in red, they quickly go from being at this point here to being all the way up here. In other words, their scan go from looking this way to looking this way quickly. Whereas for those who are physically active, even though it looks like they begin out at age 45 with a bit more amyloid in the brain, that level of amyloid pretty much stays constant across time. So their brain scans look this way at 45, this way at 65, this way too at 75, the same way. Next, we looked at another type of PET scan called glucose FDG scan. Again, with a PET scan, red means that you are seeing more of the things that you are imaging for. And so for a glucose PET scan, you want to see a lot of red because it means that the neurons, your brain cells are there, they are doing well, they are healthy, they are nourished, right? And so again, we see that at about the age of 45, again, it looks like those who are physically inactive, the red line, that they are doing a little bit better than those who are physically active. But then the action is when you follow them over time, they quickly go from here to here. That means that their FDG PET scans go from looking like this to a bit more like this over time. Whereas those who are physically active, their brain scans look this way pretty much across time. At age 45, age 55, age 65, age 75, and so forth. The same is also true when we look at both the hippocampal and volume and their performance on memory tests. Again, the story is the same, that for some reason, again, that we don't fully understand, it looks like when people are younger, it looks like those who do not do a lot of physical activity have some advantage. But it quickly disappears over time, quickly, like this sharp drop here goes that way. So again, if you look at their brain scans, this area of the brain called the hippocampus that is very involved in memory and learning goes from being plump and robust to being shriveled like that. Same thing is also true when you give them a cognitive test. So across these 4 key indices for Alzheimer's that have been very well established that age plays an adverse effect on these indices, what this study showed for the first time was that a modifiable lifestyle factor like exercise is able to rein in that well-established effect of aging on these biomarkers for Alzheimer's. Now we shift our gears to aerobic fitness. Again, I'll show you one of the earliest studies that looked at this concept. And it's actually from a lab that Dr. Prakash was affiliated with, from her mentor's lab many years ago, almost 22 years back now. But she comes from a very, very highly renowned pedigree, so I thought I would throw that one up there. Yeah. All right. So what is being shown on the screen here is the effect of aging itself on the brain. That as people age, right, these areas of the brain shown begin to demonstrate atrophy. So the neurons are shrunken a little bit. Nerve connections are lost. So this is what is shown here is a brain map of the effect of aging on the brain. Now, what they did, which was very clever then, was then to ask, okay, but what happens if we introduce aerobic fitness as a variable in this model? What happens? The map goes from looking like that to looking like this. So what you can appreciate here then is that the more aerobically fit you are, you do not experience the same levels of atrophy that is shown for the average person. And this was one of the first times that this finding was made, that the negative effect of aging on the brain was diminished by cardiorespiratory fitness. So then, in our lab, we said that we're going to take this a step further by performing what I introduced earlier as a VO2 max test. Has anyone here done that test before? Anyone? Yes, yes. So you know that, that first off, this test is horrible. Yes, like who invented this torture? Who did? I don't know, So we'll hook you up into this atrocious machine mask on your face, and connect you to a metabolic heart. And then we have you pretty much, jog on the treadmill as it goes up an incline until you collapse. No, you don't collapse, but you think you would. You think you will, but you don't. Anyway, so this test is very challenging. But it enables us capture how well your heart, your lungs, your muscles, your bones together are able to help you do sustained work. And the metric from it is called VO2 max. So the question that we then ask is that we've already established that ApoE is a cardinal risk factor for Alzheimer's. And the path through which ApoE affects risk for Alzheimer's is that it messes with the metabolism and processing of amyloid. That's what ApoE does. So that pathway from ApoE to amyloid to Alzheimer's is very well established. The question here is, does aerobic fitness break that chain in any way? Now, we split the cohort into two groups of individuals, those who are low on VO2 peak, so those who have low fitness, and those who have high fitness. The red bars are those who are those who are ApoE4 positive. The blue bars are those who are ApoE4 negative. Now, if you're looking at those who have low aerobic fitness as a subgroup, you see what you expect. That if you are ApoE4 positive, the amount of amyloid in your CSF, your spinal fluid, is low. And maybe I see some puzzled looks. Yes, so with amyloid, if amyloid is high in the brain, that is bad. If amyloid is high in the CSF, that is good. So you want amyloid to be high in your CSF, but not in your brain. If amyloid is low in the CSF, it's a sign of disease. So what you see here is what you would expect ordinarily, that if you are ApoE4 positive, your amyloid in your CSF is low. That is what you expect. That's what you see. But then the interesting thing is that if you look at those who are highly fit, those who have high aerobic fitness, you couldn't tell if an individual is ApoE4 negative or positive. So the risk for alterations in CSF amyloid that is conferred by being ApoE4 positive is abated in those who have high aerobic fitness. And this was also the first time that any group has shown this. Because we tend to think that we are born with a set of genes and they dictate our life for the rest of our lives. But what this study did was to show that might not be the case. That there is something else that can be overlaid on the set of genes you are born with that actually modifies the connection between those genes and their known outcomes. And in this case, that is aerobic fitness. All right, so the story so far is that a physically active lifestyle is good for you, at least in two ways. That it could modify the effect of aging on the brain and cognition. It could also attenuate or alter the effect of your own genes on biomarkers of the disease. That having been said, several decades back, the NIA held this conference looking at all of the evidence for risk and preventive factors for Alzheimer's. And they came to this conclusion that, even though a lot of these associations between various risk factors for Alzheimer's have been found, but that firm conclusions cannot be drawn because all of these studies mostly were what is called observational studies. So you just observe what is happening to people, right? That there is a need for randomized studies where you kind of, you assign folks to one group or another group and then run them through an experiment to see what happens. And that was that was where we took our studies next. From looking at what just happens as you observe folks to what happens when you actually manipulate some variables in those individuals' lives. And that brings us to the question of exercise. Yes, so we conducted this study called the REACH study. It's called Aerobic Exercise and Cognitive Health. And the intent here was this. If you take a group of middle-aged adults who have never done a lick of exercise in their lives, and now they are in their 60s or thereabouts, and you begin to introduce them to a regimen of physical exercise, one, does that make a difference in any way? Do you see any changes in the aerobic fitness? Because that is the first index that something is happening in them. But then even above and beyond that, does it shift the nexus of the brain health or cognitive health in any way? And so this is what the study looks like. That the folks on the bottom there are the folks in the regular physical activity group, so the control group, and at the top is the enhanced physical activity group, the exercise group. So what you can appreciate here is that over the course of the six weeks of the study, that those in the control group kind of were just allowed to keep doing whatever that they had been doing, which in principle was not much. Whereas those in the exercise group, beginning from week 1 through week 26, we increased not only the duration, so from 20 minutes to 50, but also the intensity of the activity, from about 50% of the heart rate reserve to about 80% of the heart rate reserve. So this is what the model of the intervention was. And so what did we find? The first question was that, did this lead to any change, any adaptations in their aerobic fitness? And the answer was yes. That when you look at those, again, this is pre-post, so this is the difference between where they were when they came in and where they were at the end of six months. And you can see that it is very clear that those in the enhanced activity group had a marked increase in their level of aerobic fitness. The question I often get is that, so those in the control group, why did they even have any kind of change, right? And that is an interesting question, and it goes back, to a very well-known behavioral principle that one sure way to get a behavior to change is simply to observe it, to say, I'm watching you. That's all. That's all. It changes, right? So the folks in the control group, even though they were not assigned to an exercise group, but just the fact of knowing that, oh, now I'm in an exercise study, could have led some of them to begin to do something a bit different than what they were doing previously. All right, so first question is like a big check. There is an increase, a change in the aerobic fitness, so that was good. Second then, is there any effect on their brain or cognition? Again, the brain imaging here used is the FDG PET scan, where more red is a good thing, because more red means that the neurons are robust, they are healthy, they are thriving, they are doing well. And what we see here is, so this is, again, a before and after difference, right? And with the FDG PET, again, more red is good, right? Green, not so good. So what we see in the control group is that when you look at their brains before and after, there really is not much difference. There's mostly green, so that's not much to see here. But if you look at those in the exercise group, this is what their brain looks like before and after. So there was a marked shift in the health and robustness of their neurons 6 months as compared to when they first came in the study. And what about their cognition? Again, this was a pilot study, and hence the very wide error bars, correct? So what you see here is that when you look at the performance on a memory test before and after, those in the exercise group show clearly an increase in learning and retention compared to when they came in, whereas those in the usual group actually saw a decrease in performance. The same too is also true looking at this measure called executive function. What executive function is a catch-all phrase for different types of cognitive abilities that help you carry out everyday tasks. So think about all the things that a CEO does, right? You schedule, you organize, you monitor, you keep track, you pay attention, you remember. All of that are all part of what constitutes executive function. And it is your executive function that helps you remember. So let's say that you are like making a meal, right? And then the phone rings, and you answer the phone and speak for 10 minutes and then put it down. What helps you remember that, oh, I still have stuff on the stove top? It's really not your memory. It's your executive function. It enables you to keep multiple things in your brain at the same time. And again, so we see that too is impacted by this study. So again, the measure of executive function in this study is a timed task. So lower scores is better, because lower scores means that you did that task faster. And that is why those in the enhanced activity group have lower scores. So what we have shown then is that this pilot intervention then, not only did it have an effect on the physiology of the body, so an increase in aerobic capacity, but also it led to a shift that was marked in both brain health, neuronal health, and also cognition. So to wrap up then, Alzheimer's as a disease poses, a significant public health crisis. And currently, we do not have a lot of drugs that can modify the actual disease underlying the symptoms. And there is a true need, a dire need for either alternative or complementary approaches for halting the global crisis posed by Alzheimer's. And I hope that this set of talks have been able to convince you that perhaps that one of them is exercise. So what are some things that we can take home from this presentation? The first one is that it is never too late to begin. Those individuals we studied in the REACH study were like in their late 50s and 60s and even older. They hadn't done much exercise all their lives. but they were able to see benefits from just 6 months of consistent exercise in their lives. Secondly, that we always encourage folks that, do not go from 0 to 100 in 2 weeks, right? To start small and build up, and always to check with your primary care physician. And then the next one, then again, is to start small and then build. Build not only in terms of frequency, so you could just start by going 1 day a week to 2 days to 3 days, right? Or even if you just stick with 1 day a week, but build on how intensely you work out, or build on how long you work out, from say 10 minutes at the beginning to 30 to an hour and so forth. So you can build on either frequency, intensity, duration, or on all of them, but always to titrate up. And even with just, quote, simple things like saying, okay, instead of like going to work and sitting at my desk all eight hours, I'm going to stand for a portion of my work day. Even that alone is already something. Or when I go to the store, I'm not going to keep driving round and round until I find that spot right by the door, right? No, that I can elect to park a little bit like further out and just walk to the store. So little things add up. Okay, what else? Variety is the spice of both life and of brain health. So we encourage you to do not only aerobic and fitness, but also strength, balance, and toning, and so forth. Whichever form or mode of exercise that you choose to engage in, the key goal here is to challenge your aerobic capacity. And one very easy way to do that is what is called the talk test. What is that? I'm glad you asked. So the talk test is this. If while engaged in any kind of physical activity, if you can both hold a conversation and also sing at the top of your lungs, that is probably a very mild level of intensity of exercise. It's very mild. If, on the other hand, you can talk but not sing, that probably is a moderate level of intensity of exercise. If while working out, you can barely talk without going, so I told him that probably is highly intense, it's vigorous, right? So just ask, am I able to talk and sing? If it's yes, that's probably very mild. If it's yes, I can talk, but definitely cannot sing at this point, that's moderate. If it's, I can barely hold this together, that is vigorous. Okay? So that is a way to ask, how intensely am I working out? Over and above everything, as with any type of behavioral change, persistence is the key. You got to keep going. You got to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I want to leave you with another resource. It's called the NIA, the National Institute on Aging, their Go for Life website. For anyone who's looking to begin and adopt a physically active regimen, this is a phenomenal resource with all kinds of cool things in it. I encourage you to check it out. And I am going to end with some acknowledgements. These are the folks who actually do the work. I don't do the work, So I just show up and give the talk and go home. But these guys actually are the ones who do the actual work. So I want to acknowledge them and acknowledge all my collaborators, because there is like numerous collaborators who help make a body of work of this nature possible. And of course, our funders, but most importantly, the participants, because without them, we have nothing really. And I know that at the beginning, I showed you that slide that is, my typical freak out mode at 4 o'clock every day when the alarm goes off. But I can tell you that whenever I hit the gym and my routine is done at the end of that hour, I am more in this mode. I'm like, it is so worth it. Yes. Yes. All right. So thank you for your attention, and I will take questions at this time. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so we'll take questions for Dr. Okonkwo. Should I be running in place while I'm moderating the questions?
Yes.
Okay, let's see who has a question out there. Ma'am, yeah.
The VO2 test, I know that was very important, but where do you get that? I mean, it's not probably covered by insurance and it's probably very expensive. Or can you tell, I mean, I know you said that if you can't talk while you're running, but how do we get the test?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do I get the VO2 test? So the only times I know it's covered by insurance is if somebody is having some heart issues, which I don't recommend, right? But otherwise, it's mostly a research protocol to do. Yeah, but yeah, that's the only time I know it's covered by insurance. Sadly. Yeah. Yes, please.
So we have the physical activity and education sciences building here on campus, and they have a gym for faculty and staff where they do the VO2 testing. If you wanted to show up and say, hey, I'm an alum, or I went to this talk, I think that they could also, I mean, you probably would have to pay out of pocket, but it's not very expensive.
Oh.
Okay, there you go. Look at that.
So that's called the Faculty Staff Fitness Program.
Okay.
Okay, sir, in the back.
I heard maybe a couple of years ago about a large study of many thousands, and maybe it's related to physical activity, but men who took Viagra or Cialis for a long time had a dramatic reduction in incidence of Alzheimer's, and I wondered if you thought that was related at all to your exercise.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Wow, okay. It's a higher, right?
Maybe you can repeat the question a little bit.
Right, so the question was that he had read, so he said, I know a guy who has it right. Anyway, that there is this very large study that found that taking Viagra was associated with a reduction in risk for Alzheimer's. The challenge with observational studies, as I had tried to mention, is that there are many things that can be driving each other in that association. And to say that it is this one factor and this one factor alone probably would not be accurate. So again, a question that one might ask is that to even be healthy enough to have that desire, right? What does that say about that individual, right? So there are all kinds of confounds there that may not just be due to the fact that it is some form of physical activity. But like I said, right, all physical activity is good. So, hey, okay.
Okay, let's see. Sir, in the back. Yep.
What studies have been done what of your data will also apply to Parkinson's disease, which some of the symptoms are so similar?
Yeah. So the question was what studies have been done, or if I have done any that relates to Parkinson's. My lab sadly has not done any studies linked to Parkinson's. I know that some studies have been done in that space, and the results are a little bit more mixed. And part of it is that, as you know, that Parkinson's is a motor dysfunction, right? And so it affects in some ways even the ability to do some of these types of exercises. But some of these scientists have been able to design very smart studies that can be adapted to individuals who have reduced mobility. And they do show some signal. But again, the evidence is not nearly as robust and conclusive as in Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's see. Laura, go ahead.
Are there any international observational differences in Alzheimer's in incidents that you can comment on?
So I think the question was are there any differences in worldwide incidence of Alzheimer's? Is that correct?
And behaviors associated that are observed?
Yes. So In terms of the behaviors that are observed to be linked to Alzheimer's, that is a little bit nuanced because some behaviors that we might again take for granted, let's say in the USA, like going to the gym, right? In some places, going to the gym is almost like signing your death warrant because you may not come back alive. No, that is true. Like leaving your home to go to the gym, it probably means that we may not see you come home, you know. So some of these types of activities that we kind of take for granted are things that some places they won't even consider because it's a big health safety and hazard for them. But I would say that, you know, across board, it's becoming increasingly evident. For example, you know, take the notion of ApoE4 as a risk factor for Alzheimer's, okay? That while that has become a thing that we all know and believe, the reason for that is that most of the studies on which those findings were done in people who are of European background. If you look in individuals of Asian or African background, ApoE4 does not have the same effect on Alzheimer's. Like they have the gene, but it doesn't do nothing to them, right? And maybe that might be a place to put a little plug that this is why, you know, there is a need in studies to include individuals from all types of backgrounds so that the findings from those studies can also apply to individuals of all backgrounds. Otherwise, we are trying to grow a great apple tree from findings made from a great orange tree. You know, those findings might make for growing a great orange tree, but not for growing a great apple tree. So yeah.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So somehow connected to your comment, do you believe that it should be recommended that more people get the ApoE4 testing, the gene testing, as a routinary test for, you know, annual health or things of that nature? What would be your point of view?
Wow. So if you're asking me what I would recommend, I would say,
repeat the question.
oh, sorry, that's right. Would I recommend that individuals go out and get tested for ApoE4 allele? Probably no, right? Now, that said, you know, there is an explosion of different types of marketed to and consumer genetic testing companies, in like 23andMe and so forth, that one could pay money and get, you know, a download on their genome. But as we have shown here, that just because you carry this particular kind of gene does not mean that this outcome is assured you, you know. And so if that is the case, then we want to place the emphasis on those things that you can actually do, that regardless of what your genome is, some positive outcome is likely in your future. So if you're looking for maybe something to spend money on, I would say, let's go here.
Sir, I think, yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, is there any correlation with alcohol consumption?
Great. So the question is, thank you. Sorry, he was like, do that. Yes, is there any association between alcohol consumption and Alzheimer's or dementia? I would say that the association so far is a little bit mixed, but what is becoming a little bit more established is that it's kind of like an inverted U, right? That there is some amount of red wine that is recommended to be part of one's diet, all things being equal, right? But that beyond which probably is harmful to one's health. So again, you know, these are the types of discussions that is best had between one and their primary care provider, because they know all the other aspects of your health history, and they can, you know, tell you that yes, even though on average 3 glasses of wine might be okay for everyone, but given that you have X, Y, Z factors, probably 1 is enough. But on average, there is some evidence that some amount of red wine consumption, and that is also different for men and women, and the quantity keeps changing, is beneficial to brain health. And that's because of the active ingredients in grapes.
Sir, straight ahead.
What do you think about the concept of, I've heard some researchers talk about modifiable risk factors for cognitive decline, and also you can do certain,
Those are so bright. Sorry, I can't see it.
and you can do certain things to actually increase your cognitive reserve. Do you believe in the concept of you could kind of hedge your bet and build up a cognitive reserve, or is that just more somebody's observational study?
So the question, if I understand it correctly, sir, sorry, the light is like in my eyes, and I cannot think, is that are there things that one can do to build a cognitive reserve? Is that correct? Or no?
If you do some modifiable risk factor work, do you believe that that can actually increase your cognitive reserve? Or is that cognitive reserve
Set.
more of a myth?
Oh, okay. So the question is cognitive reserve something that one can build, or is that notion itself more of a myth? Is that correct? Is that what you're asking, sir? I would say that it definitely is not a myth, for sure. No, and that is part of some of what our evidence is showing. That there are things that you can actually do. Again, you may have heard this said that the brain is like a muscle, that you use it or you lose it, and you use it, you build it, right? That is actually true. It used to be thought many eons back, that after a certain age in life, that your brain has stopped growing. It is said that what you have is what you get. But we know that is definitely not true. Not true. That again, as we have shown, that even individuals who are in their 60s, that over a 6-month period, that we can create a shift in their cognition that is measurable, that is not present for those who did not experience such intensive training. Now, what is often challenging, is that individuals do what is called a weekend and warrior, gig, right? They show up, they work hard for a few weeks, and then they go back to doing what they have always done. But the evidence is very clear that there are certain lifestyle activities and behaviors that if you engage and are consistent, that actually it puts you at an advantage. And some of these, if I go back to that slide on the Lancet and Commission, that some of them actually are things that happened when we were very young, like the amount of education we receive. Like that just creates a different baseline for everyone. Either like you start out here or you start out here. And of course, if you have more at the beginning, then even if you lose some, you are still somewhere at the top than someone who had very little to begin. So all of that are part of the notion of reserve. Did that help a little bit, sir?
Yeah, I've read it and I've heard about, you get your hearing and your vision and you're pinging your brain to keep it working.
Yes.
And if they're both down, but then the Lancet study just got debunked about the hearing part, so I don't know what to believe anymore.
Correct. Yes. So again, that is again the challenge with observational studies is that one group over here finds this finding, this group here finds this finding, this group here finds this finding, and it always comes down to what are the individuals we are studying, how are we studying them. So for example, if somebody said physical activity leads to X outcome. Wait, what do they mean by physical activity? Like how is that defined? Because even just that alone can lead to different results or outcomes. So these are always the things to ask like ourselves when we seem to be hearing different conclusions from different studies. How are they measuring those variables? Who are the people they are studying? What age group? Are they mostly men or women? All of those things which you might not think has an impact, they all do. They all do.
So I'm going to ask sort of a summary question on that.
Okay.
Is it a good thing as we age to keep stimulating our brains by coming to events like Science Sundays?
Absolutely.
And what about having a cookie and a cup of coffee and meeting with the speaker? Is that also?
Come
good
on
for us?
over. Yes, that
Okay,
too. It's
so
all
we-
physical activity from your
this will be
hand
in the-
to your mouth. Right.
No, we're going to provide it. Don't worry. This will be in the traditions room. It's a little bit over and one floor up. And we'll see you there, and you get a chance to meet the speaker and ask more questions. Thanks, everybody.